So this project is the reason I set up this channel in the first place, and that was to challenge me to do some projects that I'd normally expect to see in larger, more established workshops. So when my nephew reached out and said, "Uncle Madventure, can you do a chopping board for our new house?" How could I say no? A few hours later and a bit of Googling and 3D modeling, I came up with this design, which I did later change, but I'll get onto that later. Because it required a diamond pattern and I was using expensive black American walnut and maple, I decided to do a test run to see how I could glue up something with sufficient clamping force at 45 degrees. So the first of a few caveats: the workshop is an absolute pigsty at the moment. What you can't see here is we're going through a major renovation, putting a whole new pitched and tile roof on instead of the old flat roof, and then I'm removing the flat roof from inside. More video content on that to come. Hopefully that explains why there is just stuff everywhere. Second little caveat is I do have a thickness planer but not a jointing planer, so that meant I was forced to get all of the timber for this job with all four sides already planed. Means you're going to pay a premium, but for this project there was no other choice. So in terms of the dimensions that I got, the pre-planed timber was 600 millimeters long by 30 millimeters thick and 60 millimeters wide. The bundle was equally split with 5 lengths of maple and 5 lengths of walnut. This glue up went really well, and I also decided to use the offcuts and glue those together to create the second piece needed to create the diamond pattern. The glue used, by the way, is Titebond 3. The professional woodworkers that I'd emulated in this project, which I'll stick a link to their videos in the comments section below, they created the 45 using a sandwich of maple and walnut and then cutting it at 45 degrees on a bandsaw. I do not have a bandsaw, so I was forced to make this choice. As I was nearing the second glue up, which is to bring all these pieces together, it was at that point that I decided to change the design from what I covered earlier in the 3D model. Instead of the maple being linear, as you can see there, 4 sections with a walnut band between them, I decided I was going to create more of a staggered approach, which you'll see in a moment. If I was going to do another cutting board, I think this is the point where I would pause just before the glue up and say, okay, I've got a saw, I've got these strips, what other nuances can I put into the pattern to make it more interesting? I also decided to invest in another couple of clamps because the videos I'd seen with professionals had clamped kind of 2 on the back and 2 on the front to do the very best in making sure that it's all clamped square and doesn't bow. 24 hours later, and it's time to release the old and new clamps and have a look and see how our cutting board is looking so far. So if you have a drum sander, you probably don't need to do this step, but I only have a thickness planer. So the problem with thickness planers is you can get snipe as the boards come out of the planer. The wheel that pushes them through sort of runs out of wood and the blades just cut in a little bit deeper. I couldn't do this by making the board wider to carry those blades, which would have been ideal, so I decided just to add some onto the end. So to create even better accuracy, I glued it to a baseboard. I didn't really need to do this from a sort of wobbling perspective. On a table, the board as it stood after that glue up was actually pretty flat, but I just wanted to maximize my chances of getting the best surface I could. So quick confession as well, having broken it all out and putting a thickness gauge on it, it's actually thicker in the middle of the board than it is right at the very edges. No idea why. If you know, please stick something in the comments section below. So this next step is, I think, the most exciting but also the most nerve-wracking, because now we've got to cut the board into perfectly even widths. With the last few of these cuts done on a table saw just to make sure I kept some accuracy, it's time to get them all together, flip them round and see the final pattern in all its beautiful glory. I'll save you the excitement of watching yet another glue up, but I just want to highlight that although these individual sections look like they are kind of all perfectly flat, in reality they're not. They are slightly raised, so as I flip them around, it is ever so slightly castellated. I don't know if it's a millimeter, possibly less than a millimeter, but what it means is that I need to do a lot of sanding to get this perfectly flat. And by a lot of sanding, I mean a heck of a lot of sanding, and quite harsh sanding using a belt sander. If I was going to do these in any kind of volume, I would definitely look at a drum sander for this. Having looked at the board at this point, I decided the proportions were also wrong, so I wanted to remove a couple of the sections from the end. This would make the board roughly 300 by 450, which was really what I was after in the first place. I also checked the corners for square and made adjustments as necessary. When it came to the corner treatments, I decided that I would use a beveled edge rather than a round over, just to kind of emulate the diamond pattern that runs down the middle. I'm taking my time with the router here, as I have a tendency of sort of blowing out the very corners if I'm not careful. So I just do very light passes and have found that that works. So with the board now taking shape, it's time to get it as smooth and perfect as possible. And yes, more sanding. And annoyingly, most of this sanding was actually only necessary because I needed to remove the scuff marks of the belt sander. The sanding was a combination of 150 and a 120 grit paper. After a quick clean with an air duster, it was time to get the feet in. The feet are pretty inexpensive, £5 for more than you'll need from Amazon. From an aesthetic perspective, I also decided I wasn't going to router in some handholds or a sort of juice throat or whatever you call it that runs around the edge. With this all finished and oiled, I think it looks glorious. My nephew is incredibly happy with it. If I was going to make another, I would probably do a similar design, or maybe just play around with it a little bit, but I think it looks glorious. What do you think?